On a quiet road in the middle of nowhere, a 911 call shattered the silence. The voice on the other end was strangely calm, reporting a child who had run away and was now unresponsive. But this wasn't just a simple case of a lost kid. This was the beginning of a truly horrific story, a dark journey into a world of unimaginable cruelty. This is the case of Rebekah Baptiste, a 10-year-old girl whose short life was a living nightmare. On a hot summer day in late July, her parents, Richard Baptiste and his girlfriend, Ania Woods, flagged down paramedics on the side of a highway in Apache County, Arizona. They claimed Rebekah had run off and a neighbor had found her, but the medics saw something far more disturbing. Rebekah's tiny body was covered in bruises and scrapes. Her skin was yellow, her lips were dry and cracked, and her eyes were empty. The official report said she was unconscious and unresponsive. Something was terribly wrong, and it was about to get much, much worse. The parents' story didn't add up. They told first responders that Rebekah had a history of running away. On this day, they claimed she had been found in a drainage ditch by a neighbor and brought back to their home in a yurt, a primitive one-room hut with no electricity or running water. With no cell service, they said. They put her in the car and drove off to call 911. But there was a chilling lack of concern in their voices, a strange calmness that raised red flags from the start. "Do you know how to do CPR?" the dispatcher asked. Ania Woods replied, "Yes, I do, unfortunately." The dispatcher, perplexed, asked if she was going to perform it. Woods simply said she was waiting for EMS to arrive. Why would a parent, with a child's life hanging in the balance, not immediately start CPR? This wasn't a family desperately trying to save their daughter. It was a family trying to cover their tracks. Richard and Ania were later arrested and faced a slew of serious charges: first-degree murder, child abuse, and child molestation. This terrible story culminated in a preliminary hearing on the 4th of September. This is a court proceeding where a judge decides if there's enough evidence for a case to go to trial. For hours, the parents were forced to sit and listen as prosecutors laid out the most horrific details of their alleged crimes. The state wanted justice for Rebekah and for her two younger brothers, who were also victims. They planned to combine the couple's cases for one trial. This was the first thing the judge had to deal with. He said he would go forward with both hearings at once, but would rule on combining the trials later. The courtroom was filled with an eerie tension. The judge made it clear that any evidence admitted in this hearing would apply to both Ania Woods and Richard Baptiste. The only witness called by the prosecution was the lead case agent, Deputy Cole Sodquist, who was on the stand for almost 3 hours. His testimony would be the foundation of the case, and what he revealed was absolutely soul-crushing. Deputy Sodquist described the grim reality of the family's life in the Arizona desert. The yurt was incredibly isolated, even from its nearest neighbors. It was a simple, primitive structure with no power and no running water. But the conditions inside were even more shocking. When law enforcement entered with a search warrant, they found a scene of pure neglect. The tiny space was cluttered with trash, clothes were strewn everywhere, and animal feces covered the floor. It was a squalid, unlivable environment for anyone, let alone 3 young children. The deputy described the approximate size of the yurt as just 20 by 20 feet. In this cramped and filthy space, life was a constant struggle. This wasn't a family trying to get by. It was a home where basic needs were ignored and a safe environment was non-existent. As Deputy Sodquist continued his testimony, the judge asked him to describe the bedding situation inside the yurt. This detail, more than anything, revealed the cruel hierarchy of the home. There was a queen-size mattress on one side, an air mattress on the other, and a single, small chair cushion on the floor. The deputy confirmed that based on his investigation and the children's statements, the arrangement was clear. Richard and Ania slept on the queen bed. The 2 younger boys slept on the air mattress. And 10-year-old Rebekah? She was forced to sleep on the uncomfortable chair cushion on the floor. This wasn't a matter of space. It was a clear and deliberate act of cruelty, a physical representation of how little her life mattered to the two people who were supposed to protect her. She was literally at the bottom of the pecking order, in a home where there was no order at all. The prosecution next wanted to clarify what was so disturbing about Ania Woods' 911 call. They asked Deputy Sodquist about her strange response when asked about CPR. Woods' attorney objected, saying it was hearsay and not admissible. The judge overruled the objection. When asked if she knew CPR, Woods had chillingly replied, "Yes, unfortunately." The deputy explained that Ania had a medical background as a CNA, or certified nursing assistant. Her response wasn't a moment of panic. It was a cold, calculated answer from someone who knew exactly what needed to be done, but refused to do it. The lack of emotion was startling, revealing a deep-seated indifference. This was a woman who was medically trained to help, but chose to do nothing as a child lay dying. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was a deliberate choice to let a child suffer. It painted a horrifying picture of a woman more concerned with her own legal fate than a little girl's life. Deputy Sodquist's investigation led him to Phoenix, where the family had lived before moving to the desert. He visited Empower College Prep, the school Rebekah and her brothers attended. What he found was a long history of concern. The teachers and administration at the school were worried about the children's well-being and had made repeated reports to the Department of Child Safety, DCS. They had documented concerning statements made by the children, which indicated they were living in an unsafe and abusive environment. But for all their efforts, very little was done. Of the dozen reports the school made, DCS only deemed one serious enough to investigate. When the family moved to the isolated yurt in the desert, they took the children out of school, and that's when DCS lost track of them completely. The system designed to protect them had failed, leaving them alone with their tormentors. The deputy then detailed the chilling reports from the children's school. In November 2023, the oldest boy, referred to as KB1, came to school with scratch marks on the side of his neck. When asked what happened, he told his teacher that his mom did it because he didn't clean up. The very next day, he took the statement back, saying it was an accident. But the deputy noted the scratches were 2 inches long. A few months later, in February 2024, the same boy came to school with more scratch marks on his neck. He again admitted that he got in trouble and that his mom had done it. Again, he didn't say anything after that. Then, in September 2024, the cycle repeated. The boy came to school with fresh scratches and told his teacher that his mom had done it because he was being bad. After saying this, he told the teacher his head hurt and he needed to see the nurse. The next day, he denied it all, saying he just fell and hit his head. It was a pattern of abuse, a cycle of punishment and denial that spoke volumes about the fear these children were living in. The abuse wasn't limited to the boys. The school had also filed a report about Rebekah in October 2024. She was just 9 years old at the time. Her ankles were red and swollen, and they hurt. She told her teacher that her parents made her run laps outside the apartment complex where they used to live. The laps were a form of punishment, and they were relentless. But the most heartbreaking detail was what Rebekah told her teacher on that day. She said she didn't want to go home. The deputy confirmed that this was a frequent complaint from her. Rebekah's plea was a silent cry for help, a sign that her home life was a living hell. She was being disciplined so severely that she was physically injured, and the thought of returning to that place was terrifying. It was a small, quiet detail that screamed of years of torment and fear. During the hearing, the courtroom was allowed to see exhibits that were not shown to the public. These exhibits were photographs of Rebekah's body, and the contents were so devastating that her grandparents, who were in the gallery, broke down. Deputy Sodquist described her injuries in graphic, heartbreaking detail. She had bruises all over her body, from her head to her toes. Her lips were cracked and dry from severe dehydration. Her skin was a sickly yellow color. She was malnourished. But the horror didn't stop there. The deputy confirmed she had missing patches of hair on her head and injuries to her vaginal and anal areas. She had missing toenails and burn marks on her back that appeared consistent with cigarette burns. The medical professionals who treated her said she was so severely dehydrated that she couldn't have walked on her own. This wasn't the result of a child running away and falling in a ditch. This was the result of consistent, brutal torture. The defense attorneys for Rebekah Baptiste and Ania Woods had their chance to question Deputy Sodquist. They tried to poke holes in the prosecution's case, to create doubt and confusion. Rebekah Baptiste's lawyer, Benjamin Brewer, focused on the lack of a final autopsy report. He wanted to know the official cause of death. The deputy admitted that he didn't have the final report yet, and the cause of death had not been definitively determined. Brewer also tried to downplay some of the abuse. He asked if pulling a child's hair out with a brush to get rid of knots could be considered normal. The deputy was forced to admit that this was a claim made by Ania Woods. The defense attorney's goal was to make these horrific actions seem like something less than abuse. He asked if a belt was ever used. The deputy said he believed so, and that Richard was the one who used it. Rebekah Baptiste's attorney also questioned the deputy about the running punishment. He asked if running was a concern because it was a form of discipline, or if it would be okay if it was for athletic training. The deputy explained that it was the context of discipline that made it a concern, especially because it was so consistent and led to physical injury. The defense attorney was trying to normalize this brutal form of punishment. He also tried to cast doubt on the molestation charges. He asked if any of the children had ever made a specific allegation of a sexual nature against his client. The deputy said not to his knowledge, and that the children had not yet gone through a separate forensic interview to discuss these issues. Brewer argued that this was a very important detail, and the judge sustained the prosecution's objection, shutting him down. The defense was trying to find any angle to weaken the charges. The defense attorney for Rebekah Baptiste also made an interesting point, trying to shift the blame to his client's girlfriend, Ania Woods. He asked the deputy if, throughout the investigation, more allegations had been made against Ania than against Richard. The deputy admitted that this was true. The children had stated that the punishment came from both of them, but that they got it the worst from Mrs. Woods. The attorney was trying to paint a picture of Richard as less involved in the abuse, even though he was the father and had every opportunity to stop it. This was a classic defense tactic: deflect and blame. He tried to portray Ania as the primary aggressor, hoping to lessen the charges against his client. But the judge was not convinced. Ania Woods' attorney, Mr. Lee, focused his cross-examination on the cause of death. He pressed the deputy hard, arguing that without a final autopsy report, there was no definitive cause of death. He questioned how the state could prove that the parents caused Rebekah's death if they didn't know exactly what killed her. The deputy said he couldn't say for sure, and that he would have to refer to the doctor's reports. Mr. Lee argued that without this final conclusion, they didn't know who did what to cause her death. The deputy countered that the injuries were consistent with abuse, which led to her death. But Mr. Lee persisted, questioning the state's evidence and claiming it was all based on speculation. The judge sustained the prosecution's objection, telling the defense attorney that there was already evidence presented about the cause of death. The attorney was trying to create reasonable doubt, but the evidence was stacking up against his client. Mr. Lee also tried to downplay the living conditions in the yurt. He asked the deputy if the messy house was considered part of the child abuse. The deputy confirmed that it was. The lawyer seemed to be trying to make it sound like simple neglect, rather than a dangerous environment. The deputy then explained exactly what made the house dangerous: the animal feces all over the floor, the lack of running water, and the lack of power. The defense was trying to frame these conditions as a minor issue, but the deputy made it clear they were a significant part of the child abuse charges. It was yet another attempt to minimize the severity of what the couple had allegedly done, but the facts spoke for themselves. The filth and neglect were not a simple oversight. They were a deliberate choice that contributed to the children's suffering. The deputy also gave more details about Rebekah's final moments. When she was first found, she had no pulse. But as the ambulance arrived, she suddenly got a pulse. She was flown to Little Colorado and then on to Phoenix Children's Hospital. He told the court that by the time she arrived at Little Colorado, she was already brain dead. The child who had been walking a day before was now in a coma, her brain completely shutting down. It was a rapid and irreversible decline. The deputy explained that she had been missing large chunks of hair from her head, and that her dehydration was so severe she couldn't have walked on her own. This wasn't a girl who had simply run away. This was a child whose body was giving up after enduring years of abuse and torture. The defense attorneys were relentless in their attempts to discredit the evidence. They questioned the very foundation of the case, arguing that the medical evidence was not yet conclusive. Brewer pressed the deputy on the blunt force trauma to Rebekah's head. He asked if there was any sign of an object being used. The deputy said no, but the injuries looked consistent with hair being pulled from the scalp. The lawyer then tried to explain this away by saying Ania Woods claimed she was just trying to get knots out of the girl's hair with a brush. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was all they had. The defense lawyer also tried to argue that a belt was a common form of punishment, implying that the abuse was just a simple spanking. The deputy was forced to admit that, sometimes, a belt is used as a form of corporal punishment. The defense was trying to make the extreme seem normal. The molestation charges against Richard Baptiste were a major point of contention for his lawyer. He questioned the deputy about whether Rebekah or her brothers had ever made a direct allegation of a sexual nature against his client. The deputy said not to his knowledge, and that a separate forensic interview for the boys had not yet been done. The lawyer argued that this was a critical point. He was trying to prove that without a direct statement from the children, the charges were baseless. The deputy said he would need to refer to his report for the exact details. The defense attorney then tried to make a point that if the reports were already admitted into evidence, the court could review them. He was trying to cast doubt on the deputy's memory and imply that if the evidence existed, the deputy should know about it. The judge sustained the objection, not allowing the defense to speculate. The molestation charges were serious, and the defense was desperate to fight them. The defense's strategy was a classic blame game. Richard Baptiste's attorney tried to shift the majority of the blame to Ania Woods. He asked the deputy if the children's statements indicated that Ania was the aggressor. The deputy admitted that the children said they got it the worst from Mrs. Woods. But he also made it clear that the abuse came from both parents. The attorney was trying to minimize his client's role in the abuse, but the fact remained that he was the father and was present for all of it. The lawyer also questioned if Richard had ever combed Rebekah's hair, again trying to distance him from the specific, brutal act of pulling out her hair. It was a last-ditch effort to separate his client from the most horrific details of the abuse. But in the end, it was clear that both parents were complicit in the torture and neglect of their children. Mr. Lee, the defense attorney for Ania Woods, kept hammering on the lack of a final autopsy report. He wanted a definitive conclusion as to the cause of death. He argued that the deputy couldn't say for sure why Rebekah died, so how could his client be charged with her murder? The deputy explained that the doctor's findings were consistent with child abuse and torture, which led to her death. But the defense lawyer insisted on a final, conclusive report. He questioned the doctor's conclusion, saying that consistent with was not a definitive cause. The judge intervened again, telling Mr. Lee that he was asking the deputy to speculate. But the point was made. The defense was going to use this lack of a final report to create doubt in the minds of the jury. They would argue that no one could say for certain what killed the child, and therefore, no one could be held responsible for her death. Despite the defense's best efforts, the judge was not swayed. After hearing all the testimony and reviewing the evidence, he made his decision. He determined that there was enough evidence to bind both cases over for trial. This meant that Richard Baptiste and Ania Woods would face a jury. The court found that the evidence presented by the prosecution was sufficient to move forward on the charges of first-degree murder, child abuse, and child molestation. The judge recognized the weight of the evidence. The terrible living conditions in the yurt, the children's chilling statements about being disciplined, and the horrific injuries found on Rebekah's body. The defense's arguments about the lack of a final autopsy report and the normalization of abuse were not enough to stop the case from moving forward. Justice for Rebekah was now one step closer. Just 4 days after the preliminary hearing, on the 8th of September, Richard Baptiste and Ania Woods were formally arraigned. They were read the charges against them and asked to enter a plea. Despite all the damning evidence, despite the deputy's harrowing testimony, and despite the judge's decision to send the case to trial, both Richard Baptiste and Ania Woods pleaded not guilty. This was not an admission of innocence. This was a legal formality, a way for them to formally challenge the charges. They were now set to face the full weight of the law. The case would proceed, and all the evidence that was presented in the preliminary hearing would be used against them in a full trial. This was a long and difficult road, but the fight for justice for Rebekah had officially begun. This case is a horrifying reminder of the silent battles many children face. Rebekah Baptiste's story is a call to action, a reminder that we must be vigilant and report any signs of abuse. Her life, though cut tragically short, will not be in vain. The pursuit of justice for her is a difficult one, but it is necessary. The fact that the case is going to trial is a sign that the system, though it failed her before, is now working to hold those responsible accountable. The couple will have to face a jury of their peers, and the world will be watching. The hope is that the evidence, which was so powerful and so heartbreaking in the preliminary hearing, will be enough to get a conviction and a sense of closure for Rebekah's family. The details of Rebekah's life are hard to hear, but her story is one that needs to be told. The fight for justice continues, and the world is watching. We will continue to follow this case and update you with the latest developments. Remember, every child deserves a chance to live in a safe and loving home. It's up to all of us to be the voice for those who can't speak for themselves. If you suspect a child is in danger, please reach out to the authorities immediately. You could be the one who makes all the difference. Thank you for watching.